So good morning and a warm welcome to the commercial awareness session this morning. My name is John Watkins. I'm the University of Law's Director of Employability. And over the next sort of 20 minutes or so, I'm going to give you some headline messages around commercial awareness. I guess two real contexts to this. One is how can you demonstrate commercial awareness? It's very easy to say, oh, I'm commercially aware, but what does that mean? How do you show people that that's the case? And very much recognizing that there's an opportunity for you to interact with a number of employers immediately after my talk starts, so my talk finishes, and throughout the rest of the program. So how can you engage with employers on a commercially aware basis moving forward? So we're going to go through a few slides, just give you a little bit of insight from my perspective on what this all means. First of all, a definition. So from the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, a definition that says that commercial awareness is an understanding of what is happening in the business world, in the economy, and how it affects you and businesses. So commercial awareness is two dimensions. One is what is happening to businesses, to organizations, and in the legal context to firms, chambers, etc. What's going on in the world around us? But beyond that, it's then what does that mean for you? How can you fit within that world? How can you demonstrate your appropriateness to be a serious candidate if you're looking for a job, or to progress within an organization if you're already in employment? So we're going to look at both of those dimensions and see how we can unpick them over the course of the next 15-20 minutes. Let's look at employers, and you're going to be speaking to employers throughout the day and over the course of the program. So here are some things that they are thinking about in terms of commercial awareness. And I'm going to touch on each of these subjects, but perhaps spend the most time on workplace flexibility. So we have over the last 18 months had the vast majority of people in the professional services working from home, if not full-time, on a largely full-time basis. We are now seeing people starting to go back to offices, either because they've been fully recalled by their employer or on a more sort of blended hybrid basis. So this is a challenge for employers. Just put yourself in the shoes of the employer who's thinking about, how do I run my business now as we go into the autumn of 2021? Now, in theory, what we've seen over the last 18 months is that people can be quite efficient working from home. You save yourself the commute, and you potentially also have a better opportunity to unwind and perhaps step away from what's going on and be able to navigate various different places quite quickly. Yesterday, I was in Leeds in the morning, I was in Asia in the afternoon, and finished up in London in the evening. Clearly, I couldn't have done that if I'd had to physically been in those places. But the opposite effect is that, of course, people are not interacting. They're not getting the on-the-job learning experience in quite the same way as they might have done. They're not having the opportunity to get the social dynamics. They're not getting some of the benefits from mental health and, of course, the physical health and the separation from the personal life and the professional life when everything is going on under the same four walls. So as an employer, you've got to weigh all those things up and make a commercial decision about how you run your business moving forward. And it's complex. If I were to say to my staff, I don't mind when you work or where you work from, then in theory, I'd have a very satisfied workforce that could choose what they want to do, when they want to do it, and possibly mean that I've got people from Monday morning at 9 o'clock through to Sunday evening at 9 o'clock, all operating and giving me a 24/7 service. But how do I manage that? How do I make sure that people are performing effectively? How do I make sure that people are working the required hours? Not too few, not too many. Actually, what I need as an employer, in a sense, is a more simple rule. I'd like everybody to broadly work within these parameters because that makes it far easier for me to control and manage. So this is a commercial decision. Do I do something that potentially opens up lots of potential opportunities and expands the horizons, or do I contract it so that it becomes easier to manage? And those are the trade-offs that I need to have. So that's a really prime example. And I would be asking the employers as you meet them over the next few days, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? How are you going to manage it? And what does that mean for somebody like me who might want to work in a city which is a long way away, might want to work in an office where I can go in every day? What does that mean for me and how I might fit within your organization? On the other areas, we've got technology. How does technology impact? Well, a number of tasks, particularly the process-related tasks, can be done a lot more quickly when you have the opportunity to perhaps accelerate some of the things through computer techniques. That has an impact in terms of what do you need staff to do? How do people work when perhaps they're working in combination, part machine, part person? That's an interesting dynamic in terms of where we're moving forward. The diversity, inclusion and equality issue is both a fundamental human rights issue in some respects in terms of how we treat people, but also commercially. And you can see employers who are specifically pushing their diversity agenda and their commitment to it. They're doing that because they believe it's right, but they're also doing it with a commercial eye to impress potential applicants, to impress clients, and demonstrate that they are alive to all the issues that are going on. There's changes to the legal profession, the introduction of SQE, replacing the LPC, and qualifying work experience replacing the training contract. That has significant implications for the journey that a prospective lawyer might take. How do we determine what we as individuals do? Which route do we take? How do employers decide who to recruit? Those are all commercial decisions built on decisions about what do I need in terms of resource, how do I make sure I've got the right resource in play at the right time to do the right work at the right level that gives me the return that I want. All of those factors are being borne in mind by the organization. If you can understand how you can come in and do what you can do at the pay rate that you're being offered, you then pass it through to the next person who does the next bit, and it goes on until it goes out to the client at a commercially attractive rate, then you're in a very strong position to justify why you might get that job that you're after. And finally, the 2020s professional. That's really what, again, I will be asking the employers in terms of commercial awareness. What are they looking for in terms of skills and attributes from the next generation? On that basis, you need to be able to show them. That's the deal here, is that commercially you need to say, I've got the things you're looking for. Here is our diagram from the University of Law Employability Service, developing the 2020s professional, subtitled Virtually Confident and Agile. Lots of skills in there that hopefully you will recognize and will be familiar, and won't be ones that you're thinking are radical changes. The reality, of course, is that employers have different priorities as to which of those skills they make the most important. They might call it their values, they might call it their ethos. You need to be looking at their website, you need to be talking to them to work out what it is, above all else, of all of these skills that you could bring to the party, what is the one that's going to really stand you out. Some people will talk about quality, some will talk about client service, some will talk about creativity, some will talk about building relationships. Of course, all of those things are important, but if one is highlighted as being the most important, then you have to show to the employer that's the one that you've got the most of. A couple of words in here which are a little bit 2020 and 2021 relevant. Towards the top, being an expert in transformation. Ask the employers you meet, what are you looking for? You're having to transform your business to be able to deal with the post-pandemic requirements. What are you looking for in terms of the ability for someone as an employee to be able to transform and adapt to the world that they're working in? The ability to learn from disruption. How do they identify what disruption needs to be dealt with? How do they identify people who are good at dealing with disruption? So these are the sorts of things that you need to be, again, not only aware of in terms of overall personal development as being important, but honing in on the ones that you know employers regard as the most significant. Commercial awareness can be looked at from so many different angles, and I appreciate that in the short time I've got today, I'm just going to give you a sort of snapshot from a personal human perspective on one of the things that goes through the heads of a recruiter and an employer that, again, if you can get your head around it, demonstrates tremendous commercial awareness. In most situations with organizations, you have people that go round a learning curve, starting in the bottom right of this diagram and ending up in the bottom left. And what that really means is that any person that comes into an organization has to go round this curve. Now, at a very simple level, employers are looking for people that can go round curves quickly, because the quicker you end up in the far left-hand corner, the better. Let me just give you a brief example here of how this might work. On day one, you go into an organization, you've got lots of enthusiasm, lots of knowledge that you've gathered from your studies, but you haven't worked for the organization before. You don't know how they do things around there, and therefore you need to understand. And that's really what an induction process does. And it's an induction process that might be quite intense for a week and continues over the course of the first 3 or 6 months, in which you become familiar with how the organization works and how you fit within it. And that's a directing box in this argument, in this diagram. You go round the curve, being given direction, being told what to do, how things work around here. As time goes by, you start to move round the curve. You start to know how things are being done round here, and you start to learn from the things that you perhaps have got wrong the first few times and need to start ironing out and getting better. So you start to go round the curve, you start to ask questions, you start to get coaching and support from people who say, if you do it this way, it's more effective. Don't do that because that's going to end up with a problem. Do it this way. So you have a dialogue that allows you to learn from previous mistakes and a context because you've been doing that type of work. And the same thing applies as you go around the curve further. As you get more knowledge and capability, you start to be able to do things for yourself. And you're in the supporting box where you're actually now quite confident in doing things. You've still got someone there to sign off what you're doing, but the reality is that you are now pretty much on top of things. And then you get into the box at the bottom, the delegation box, the box that I can assure you every employer wants you to be in as quickly as possible. Because in the delegation box, some piece of work needs to be done. You know exactly how to do it. They give it to you. You do it and you do it perfectly. And that is what, in a commercially aware mindset, the employer is looking for. Are you the candidate who can get into that delegation box quickly, make my life easier, and make my business more profitable? I'll just give you one other quick example here, because I did this the other day with somebody who liked the driving scenario. That when you start driving, you're in the right hand box. Someone tells you this is the 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 wheel. This is the gearbox. This is the signals. This is where you know how you drive the car. You can't get into a car and start driving it immediately. You need that guidance and tuition. Once you've had that basics of how to get the car started, then you go round the curve, and a driving instructor or a parent or a family friend will tell you, you know, you keep on turning left too sharply. You need to think about this, or when you come up to a T junction, you're not doing this quite right. So they give you that coaching and support. And then they start to say, okay, now you're pretty confident doing here. You drive and I'll be here. I've still got my foot on these pedals to make sure that if something goes wrong, I can stop the car. But essentially now you're pretty confident. And then you get to the point where you pass your driving test and you go off and you can do it yourself. And again, that's what you, when you start driving, are aspiring to. I want to be able to drive without anybody else sitting in the car with no L plates on the back of it. And therefore, I've got to go around this learning curve to get there. There's an equivalent one of those which exists for all tasks that you might be taking in a workplace. So how do you demonstrate this to employers? Well, it really helps to show that you've got some familiarity with the work that you're doing. So any relevant work experience that you can show off that says, look, I already know some of this stuff because I've had some prior experience. Therefore, my starting point is a little bit further round the curve than other people. Prima facie to a potential employer, that's quite attractive. I've got two candidates, one's at the bottom of the curve and one's made a little bit of progress round it. I'm going to go for the one that's made progress around it because they'll get to delegation quicker. But it's not quite that simple. People don't go round curves at an even pace. So again, I would be looking for past examples of you and what you've done in your life that shows that you're a fast learner. And it could be that you've picked up a language, or you started a new hobby, or that you have demonstrated that you have been able to learn the law or parts of the law in a way that are very efficient. Maybe in a part-time job that you were brought in and you've managed to get promoted and start take on more responsibility. That's a real tangible demonstration that once you've started, you're a quick learner, you go round curves rapidly. And that demonstration to an employer that you will end up in that delegation box rapidly makes you a more attractive candidate in commercial terms. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense in terms of where we're coming from here with the question that that often is asked about how can I demonstrate that I've got commercial awareness. Well, I'm demonstrating that I'm a rapid learner. I've been through these types of things quickly. Just carrying on then with the scenario here and looking at what this all means. The primary conclusion I would reach before we start going into some questions is that as you go through the thought process for what commercial awareness looks like, you will do an awful lot of good by putting yourself into the shoes of other people and what they're looking for. That's personal commercial awareness. When it comes to the business side of things, you then need to demonstrate that you've got an eye on what's going on in the world. It's a very complicated, fast-moving world at the moment. 18 months ago, we would have said, look at Brexit, see what the consequences are of Brexit. Don't forget that Brexit is still having consequences. But clearly now we are in a situation where the government has massive national debt. It has still got people on the furlough scheme, although that's winding off. It's got high streets that are empty and under threat, with rates that are far too high for many people to pay. There is unemployment levels which are very high, particularly at the younger end of the scale. It's got many people at the top end of the scale who can't retire because they no longer have the disposable income that they want, and therefore they intend to work for longer. Throw into that the consequence also of Afghanistan and wider political and other dynamics that are in play, then all of these things have some reverberations. McDonald's milkshakes, which are now running low, that's not something that's happened last night or the day before. That's a consequence of a whole series of things that have happened. And the encouragement for you is to go away and think about what has led to the situation where McDonald's no longer has milkshakes available. There's an element of Brexit. There's an element of COVID. There's an element of perhaps the delays that were brought about by the Evergreen ship in the Suez Canal. There's all sorts of other implications that are thrown in there. Drivers being reduced in terms of the numbers on pingdemic. So all of those factors come into play. So it isn't simply a narrow, let's talk about the fact that there's no milkshakes at McDonald's. This is actually something you need to contextualize into a very significant number of steps along the way that have led to it. And that's a demonstration of commercial awareness, that you understand all the component parts, not just the narrow consequence, perhaps, of what has happened. You can see in front of you some contact points if you wish to look at either the social media. There's also an email address in there if you wish to follow up. I think I've pretty much reached the time now that I was given to be able to run through the presentation. So I will pass over to see whether Ali has any questions that have been emerging through what was a slightly alternative look at commercial awareness, but hopefully one that gives you some food for thought.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. You and the University of Law are clearly in a very unique position to be able to deliver something like this. So it was very interesting, very insightful, and hopefully lots that the students watching can use when they're talking to the employers in the booths and going through the application process. Yeah, we've had a good number of questions, so keep them coming, everybody, and upvote the ones that you want me to ask. But towards the end there, you were talking about a lot that's happening in the world and how to utilize that commercial awareness. One of the students says, what websites, newspapers, or I guess any other sources would you recommend for keeping up with commercial developments?
Okay, well, I'll give a little bit of a plug to an organisation that we work with at the University of Law. We have a commercial awareness challenge running several times each year, and we work with an organisation called Watson's Daily, which in fact is an individual by the name of Watson. So watsonsdaily.com is a good place to go. What Peter Watson does every day is he gathers vast numbers of pieces of information from numerous sources and summarizes into 2 pages the key things that people need to be aware of. What that does is it gives you a very short, sharp snapshot that you can digest very, very easily in a relatively short period of time. And if you do that for a few weeks, a few months, then you start to see the cumulative benefits of stories that were starting 2 months ago, now having another element to them, which you can look back and think, oh yes, I remember that happening. The note of caution I would put to that, though, is that the world is not there to allow things to be made easy for you, and to get someone else to go away and do that is a form of cheating. Actually, it's quite commercially aware that you, rather than spending all the time yourself, you get somebody else to do it for you. But you are not going to always be able to rely upon that. You do need to have an inherent amount of knowledge yourself. So my encouragement would be, rather than saying that you should all do this, I would pick 1 or 2 organizations that you feel you've got a genuine interest in. That could be a law firm to demonstrate your legal knowledge. It might also be another retail outlet or a football club or something else that you follow. And as you follow it, you follow on a regular basis to see what is happening there, And then over a 6-month period, you look back and say, okay, can I summarize what's happened to this organization in 6 months? The share price has gone up. The managing director has left. A rights issue has taken place. There's been a major change in strategy. They have closed down this office. All of those things pull together, and then get an understanding in your own mind about where that business is now, and where you think it might be in a few months' time. One of the questions we ask in our commercial awareness challenge is write the headlines for 12 months' time. Talk about businesses in the travel industry, in the retail industry, in the hospitality industry. Speculate where you think they might be in 12 months' time. And the people that do that best are the ones that have got the previous 12 months worth of knowledge to be able to build upon, and hopefully then come up with some sensible, by no means guaranteed accurate, but at least sensible in the context of what's gone before, suggestions about what might happen in the future.
Yeah, really good. Great insight there. Thank you so much. And I think that covers, our two most upvoted questions. So thank you very much. And I think Aisha as well. Thank you for your question, which is on a very similar vein. Another highly voted question was from Hannah. So thank you very much, Hannah. I'm assuming she's a non-law student. She says, how can you show your interest in law while studying a non-law degree? Have you got any tips for Hannah?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think first and foremost, being on events like this and soaking up information is very relevant. It's always been the case, and it remains so, that law firms and the legal profession very much value those people that have done a non-law degree, because you've got a different angle to look at things, both the skill set but also potentially the knowledge base. So I don't know what you're studying, but we've certainly had students in the past that perhaps have done science degrees, and they think, well, that's got no relevance whatsoever, has it? Well, actually it has. If you've got clients that are in the scientific industry, then your awareness of some of the scientific terms and the principles that go into a scientific business, then you become a very useful figure to understand the business. And understanding the business is the root of where all professional advice comes from. But I think as a non-law student, often the challenge is that to get work experience, legal work experience, your challenge is, well, they're looking for someone that's got some more experience than you have. So it's a vicious circle. I think any experience is valuable, and every single job that you do has rules and regulations. There's employment law in there, there's health and safety law in there, there are contracts reverberating around. I once had a student who worked for a retail outlet who came up with that same comment. How do I show I've got some legal awareness here when all I'm doing is working on the shop floor? And they went to their boss and they said, I'm conscious of some of the things that have happened around here. Can I have a look at our health and safety policy? Yes, you can. The health and safety policy was out of date. It wasn't up to date with recent legislation, and the business was therefore at risk. When this was informed to the boss, they were delighted to find that information, and then passed on a series of other policies and other legal related questions for that student to have a look at alongside doing their retail job. So they were able to demonstrate a proactivity, a commercial awareness, a knowledge, and also added value on the CV that conveyed a whole lot of positive attributes, as well as a slightly stronger reference to having some legal knowledge.
Lovely, thank you very much. Some great questions coming in, so thank you very much everyone for those. Another anonymous one. One of the students says, you mentioned lots of challenges employers are facing right now, but we're looking to pin you down for what do you think is the biggest challenge facing law firms?
I think the difficulty is that you can very rarely pin down and say that any one challenge in isolation is there, in the same way that when I'm looking at skill sets for individuals, people who say, well, I'm very good at teamwork. Well, teamwork involves communication, very often involves leadership, often involves dealing with adversity, involves problem solving. So all of those things intertwine. I think a lot of law firms at the moment are wrestling with a number of balls that are up in the air. What's the future of the profession? How are we going to recruit in talent that wants to work for us and is able to come through the new journey that's not fully necessarily understood at the moment? And how do we do that in an environment where the traditional 9 to 5 working from an office is under threat? But the top priority of the top 100 graduate recruiters, which includes a number of large law firms, is to have a diverse, inclusive and equal workforce. And I think in the broader context of Black Lives Matter, of Me Too, of everyone's invited and social change that's going on at the moment, I think that probably the whole diversity question is the one that is the most taxing for law firms, if I was to come off the fence and give you a single answer.
Yeah, and I must admit, from an RMP and kind of rate replacement point of view, when we speak to law firms and others, it's definitely an area that everyone wants to be better at, I guess, and really work on. So yeah, I very much agree with that one. So look at some of the other questions we've come through. So towards the end of your presentation, you talked about disruption, and we've got a question for what does disruption mean for employers and potential employees?
I suppose, you can look at what's been happening with deliveries, and I mentioned the McDonald's example. Disruption was that all plans were in place to have a workforce doing their job, and then suddenly one got pinged, others got pinged, people fell with ill health, and suddenly those plans that have been put in place to get things from A to B didn't work. Likewise, if you're dealing with clients and you have arranged that you're going to do the following activities over the course of a month, and suddenly you lose a few members of your team because they can't operate in the way that they were operating before, if you can't get hold of some of the things that you need to be able to do the job with, then that requires you to think on your feet, to find solutions, to manage expectations and therefore be ready. And I think it's about the disruption to a business is then, okay, how does the business as a whole react? And very often that's going to be involving individuals. So I think it's about having a positive attitude and saying, I don't expect that things are going to work out exactly as planned. I am ready to be able to adjust what I'm doing. I'm versatile, I'm agile, using real life examples of when that's happened to people in the past, and actually saying disruption is going to be a constant feature of the next 12 to 18 months, if not beyond. And therefore I am ready, going in with my eyes open, expecting things to be disrupted. We have a number of places in London at the moment that are blocked off by environmental protesters, and that again, somebody I was talking to yesterday was supposed to get to somewhere in London and couldn't do that. That also throws up the bigger challenge of how a business is going to operate if they don't want members of their staff to be either flying or traveling quite so much because of the climate agenda. And the other thing that's also very pertinent at the moment is obviously the mental and physical well-being of individuals, and there's a lot of disruption with people who are not visibly sick because they haven't broken their leg or got something that makes them unwell, but are suffering significantly with the mental challenges, and that's again a huge challenge to be able to personally deal with if you are struggling, but also on a business level, the disruption brought about by people who are unable to work because of the mental well-being issues that are becoming more and more prevalent.
Great, thank you. I'm just conscious of time, so we've got probably time for a last question. And there's one that have come in, or two that have come in relatively recently and have had a good number of up likes on them. So you talked about like sources of how you can keep up to date. And there's a question here: how would you better understand the commercial events and how it affects law firms and their clients? So I guess taking the information and then utilizing it into more of a commercial way.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different things you can do here. One, I think, is to look at scenarios and sort of come to your own conclusion. So you almost want to pre-prepare an answer. So if someone says to you, what are you thinking about this particular topic? You've got something that really fits in with you and your understanding. So, pick something from your personal life that you can say, actually, it was really interesting that because this happened, that happened subsequently, this couldn't happen, that was delayed, etc. And just frame something that you think actually demonstrates that you've looked at something in a bigger picture rather than in isolation. And in terms of the law firms, and this can apply right away, put yourself into their shoes. Why are they here today? Why are they sitting in a booth in a moment ready to have your questions? be thinking through that process. You can ask them the question as well, because it's, there's no rule to say that you can't. But increasingly, as you start to get more sophisticated, you can think, okay, well, the reason they're here is that rather than spending time charging money to clients for doing work, they are investing in the potential for the future talent that might come in and make them even more money in the future. That they are also recognizing that their competitors are here, so they need to be thinking about making sure they're not absent in terms of these types of events. And as you go through, you start to think about things that are more sophisticated than simply they were asked to be here, they've turned up, and they're answering my questions. And the deeper you can go, the more you start thinking, okay, so if that's the reason why they're here, then actually they're looking at me as a potential employee. They're looking at whether I could be someone that can add value. Let me show them how I could add them some value. That's a really good step then to be able to not just put yourself in their shoes, but actually actively interact with them.
Amazing. I think that's a really nice place to finish that. Now, as everyone who's watching, it's your opportunity to put what John said into practice. And I believe we've got half an hour now. So use the booths, go into the booths, ask some questions, use the chat, and potentially get your videos to us to interact with the employers and utilize a lot of the current affairs information that John's given you. So, John, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. To everyone watching, thanks very much for your questions and your interaction. And we will see you again on the main stage at 12:15 for Simmons & Simmons. Thank you very much, everyone.